I remember standing in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. By all objective measures, it was a perfectly peaceful Saturday. The coffee was brewing, the house was quiet, and there was nothing on the schedule but the promise of rest. Yet, my stomach was a knot of icy tension, and my heart was beating a nervous, staccato rhythm against my ribs. I looked down at my hands, noticing the almost imperceptible tremor, a private signal that the war inside me was raging, even though the external world offered a truce. Have you ever felt that? That profound disconnect where your life looks stable, maybe even successful, but internally, you're convinced the ceiling is about to collapse? We are masters of disguise, aren't we? We navigate meetings, fulfill obligations, smile at checkout clerks, all while carrying an invisible weight, a dull, constant hum of worry that never fully shuts off. For years, I believed that constant exhaustion and that metallic taste of low-grade fear were just the price of admission for adulthood. I accepted the racing thoughts at 3 a.m., the sudden, sharp flashes of imagined disaster, and the pervasive sense that I was always forgetting something crucial. We call it stress, we call it burnout, but I eventually recognized it for what it truly was: silent anxiety, the quiet enemy draining our reservoir of confidence and stealing our fundamental peace. I learned to read the signals in my body before they manifested as full-blown panic. It wasn't the dramatic collapse often portrayed in movies. It was far more insidious. It was the stiffness in my jaw that never fully released, the perpetual clench of my shoulders as if bracing for impact, the difficulty breathing deeply even when sitting still. It was the constant mental loop of reviewing conversations, planning for the worst-case scenario 1,000 times, and then feeling absolutely paralyzed by the simple act of choosing what to wear. It's a thief of the present moment. I want to tell you, immediately and fiercely, that if this resonates, you are not failing. We are not defective. These physical and mental alarms, the accelerated heart rate, the difficulty focusing, the sudden rush of catastrophic thinking, these are real, measurable alerts from your nervous system. They are the evidence that you have been fighting a silent battle for too long. For too long, we have tried to intellectualize this feeling away, telling ourselves to just be grateful or just relax. But those commands fall flat against the deeply wired system of fear that is running the show behind the curtain. In this journey we are beginning, I am inviting you to stop minimizing that inner struggle. I'm not here to offer quick fixes or superficial optimism. I'm here to guide us both into the deeper mechanics of why our brains create this exhausting cycle of fear, even when the immediate threat is absent. We're going to look honestly at the symptoms that have become so normal they are practically invisible, the secret signs that your anxiety has gone silent and started to run your life. But more importantly, we're going to start the process of distinguishing between who you are and the anxiety that is merely a temporary chapter in your story. My promise to you is that by the end of our time together, you will have a map to reclaim not just your peace, but your inherent mental control. We start by simply acknowledging the pain, acknowledging that we deserve something profoundly better than this constant, weary fight. The acknowledgement of the pain is merely the first, tender step. What comes next is the difficult, yet essential, work of looking directly at the architecture of the battleground within us. I call this the inner battle, because that constant, silent hum of anxiety is not a random malfunction. It is the predictable, self-perpetuating outcome of deeply rooted limiting beliefs and emotional wounds we have carried, often since childhood, like heavy, worn-out luggage. Think about the self-sabotage. Why do we pull back just as success is within reach? Why do we scroll endlessly through social media when we know a crucial task awaits? Why do we repeatedly choose the familiar comfort of misery over the terrifying unknown of fulfillment? It's because the inner battle is fought by a powerful character we must confront, the inner critic. This critic isn't trying to hurt us. Ironically, it's often trying to keep us safe by keeping us small and predictable. It's a flawed protection mechanism, birthed from the moments where we felt judged, rejected, or insufficient. We internalized the harsh whispers of others, or perhaps even the unintentional silences, and sculpted them into a rigid belief system. I am not good enough. I will fail. If I shine too brightly, I will be abandoned. I remember a period in my own life where I perpetually felt like an imposter, constantly waiting for the moment when my luck would run out and everyone would discover I was fundamentally inadequate. This wasn't a thought, it was the atmosphere I breathed. My limiting belief was simple and cruel. If I relax, I will lose control. This manifested in the 10 hidden symptoms we often overlook. They aren't the classic physical panic attacks, they are the quiet drains. Let me reveal just a few of the most common ones that might surprise you. First, there's decision paralysis, the inability to choose small things, lunch, clothes, movies, because every choice feels weighted with catastrophic significance. Second, the emotional flashback, not a trauma memory, but a sudden, disproportionate emotional reaction to a mild stimulus, hijacking your present moment and plunging you into a familiar, painful past feeling. Third, compulsive busyness, always needing to be productive, confusing motion with meaning, because stillness feels like vulnerability. Fourth, the chronic low-grade headache or jaw clenching, physical manifestations of repressed mental strain. Fifth, the need for constant reassurance from friends, partners, or even reading excessive reviews before buying something insignificant. And the sixth, the most destructive of all, the erosion of inner trust. We stop trusting our own judgment, making us dependent on external validation, further cementing the belief that we are incapable of navigating life successfully on our own. We must understand that these patterns, this self-sabotage, is not a moral failing. It is a learned mechanism of defense. When we were younger, perhaps showing our true desires resulted in shame, or expressing vulnerability led to exploitation. Our nervous system, brilliant and archaic, filed away a protocol. Vulnerability equals danger. Now, decades later, when we approach true opportunity or emotional depth, the system throws up the old alarm, creating that anxiety loop. The brain, our magnificent machine, isn't distinguishing between the actual threat of a tiger and the imagined threat of sending an imperfect email. It defaults to the highest level of vigilance. This is why compassion is the only way forward. We must look at our inner critic not as an enemy to be silenced, but as a traumatized, overzealous bodyguard. It requires acknowledgement, not condemnation. It requires us to gently shine a light on the core emotional wound, the fear of not belonging, the fear of being seen fully, the fear of abandonment, and say, I see you, old fear. But I am an adult now, and I am rewriting the safety parameters. This acknowledgement is the critical juncture where we move from being victims of our own anxiety to conscious architects of our healing. This takes us to the inevitable moment of awakening, the realization that we have been fundamentally misidentifying the anxiety itself. The shift must occur from declaring, I am anxious, which is an identification, a permanent state of being, to stating, I am experiencing anxiety, which is a temporary state, a feeling passing through. This distinction is paramount because identity is destiny. When we internalize the diagnosis, we empower the condition to define our actions and limit our potential. When we externalize the experience, we create the necessary space between ourselves and the emotion, giving us leverage to respond rather than merely react. I realized I had built my entire self-worth around the expectation of perfection, a demanding, unforgiving idol. I was living by a rigid, unwritten code. I must be flawless in my work, endlessly available to my friends, and emotionally bulletproof. The anxiety was merely the psychological cost of attempting the impossible. The awakening is the moment we observe the fear without judgment, recognizing it simply as energy, a massive surge of activated nervous system energy with nowhere to go. We often attempt to fight the fear, to suppress the racing heart, or to argue logically with the catastrophic thought. But fighting the energy only amplifies it. Imagine throwing gasoline on a small flicker of a candle. Instead, the profound shift involves seeing the fear as information, a messenger, however inconvenient and loud. What is this fear trying to protect you from? What boundary is it screaming for you to erect? What desire has it buried deep within the layers of what-ifs? The true shift is the discovery that your inner strength isn't found in the absence of anxiety, but in your ability to hold the anxiety with kindness and continue moving forward anyway. We shift from being consumed by the feeling to becoming the observer of the feeling. We reclaim our internal sovereignty by asserting, "You, anxiety, are here, but you do not own the steering wheel." This is the power of reframing. We stop viewing the nervous tension as a sign of weakness and start recognizing it as a sign of deep sensitivity and imagination. People who experience anxiety often possess incredible foresight and powerful empathy. They can imagine future problems because their brains are highly attuned to patterns and possibilities. The key is redirection. We must consciously repurpose that powerful mental energy away from imagined catastrophe and toward intentional creation. My breakthrough came when I understood that my obsession with predicting the worst-case scenario was just a distorted form of deep planning and meticulous care. When I learned to channel that obsessive energy into genuine preparation, rather than futile worrying, the power dynamics changed. The anxiety diminished because the underlying mental mechanism felt utilized, not suppressed. This is the core of the awakening, the acknowledgement that you possess a powerful mind, and the transformation lies not in quieting it, but in teaching it a new, purposeful vocabulary. It's an act of self-love to recognize that the very intensity of your struggle is proof of the immense capacity for life and feeling that resides within you. This is the new inner strength, the courage to be messy, to be imperfect, and to recognize that your inherent worth is not, and never has been, tied to your performance or your ability to eliminate fear. We step into the light of self-acceptance, knowing the work is ongoing, but the foundation, our intrinsic goodness, is already secure. Now that we have established the crucial mindset shift, moving from being defined by anxiety to merely experiencing it, we must move into the practical realm. Awakening is the what, but tools for growth are the how. We cannot simply meditate our way out of decades of conditioned fear responses. We need mental habits and emotional strategies that physically restructure our nervous system and rewire our default thought pathways. This process isn't about monumental leaps. It's about disciplined micro-choices made consistently over time. The first and most vital tool is what I call the 3-second pause. When that familiar wave of low-grade worry washes over you, the sudden urge to check your phone again, the mental review of a past slight, the fear spike before a presentation, we interrupt the default pattern. Instead of immediately engaging the thought or the action, you pause. Physically pause. Take 3 deliberate seconds. This 3-second gap is the birthplace of conscious choice. In that tiny space, you ask yourself, is this thought a fact, or is it a feeling presenting itself as a fact? By creating distance, you break the cycle of automatic reactivity. This simple ritual empowers you because you are using your consciousness to interrupt the momentum of fear, asserting the highest part of your brain over the primal, reactive part. The second essential tool involves emotional hygiene. Just as we shower daily to cleanse our bodies, we must cleanse our minds of the accumulated toxic emotional residue. I found immense power in the simple practice of the evening dump ritual. Before bed, I would journal for 5 to 10 minutes, strictly focused on emptying the mental clutter, worries, and incomplete tasks from the day onto the page. I don't analyze or judge the thoughts. I simply export them. This serves 2 purposes. It prevents the mental residue from hijacking your sleep cycle, and it trains your mind that the work of worrying is contained within a specific time slot, not a perpetual activity. When the thought arises during the day, you can mentally file it away, saying, "Thank you for the alert. I will process this during the evening dump." This practice is a powerful boundary setter for the overactive mind. Third, we must learn to be fluent in the language of the body, which often speaks louder and more honestly than our thoughts. Our anxiety lives in the nervous system, in the tightened breath, the tense shoulders, the shallow chest breathing. We must actively, daily, regulate the system. This means adopting somatic strategies that physically signal safety to the primitive brain. One of the most effective tools I discovered is the grounding anchor. When the anxiety begins to rise, instead of fighting the feeling, I shift my full focus to my physical environment. I name 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste. This pulls the scattered, fearful mind out of the imagined future and firmly into the tangible safety of the present moment. I am not trying to suppress the feeling. I am simply overriding the fear response by providing undeniable evidence that I am, right now, physically safe. When combined with controlled, diaphragmatic breathing, breathing deep into the belly and extending the exhale longer than the inhale, you send a direct signal to the vagus nerve that the emergency is over. These are not grand gestures. They are microscopic moments of self-reclamation. They are the scaffolding upon which we build enduring peace. Consistency, not intensity, is the master key here. We are training a very old, very stubborn part of ourselves, and that requires patience, repetition, and the unwavering conviction that we are capable of guiding our own emotional terrain. With the necessary tools now in hand, we stand at the threshold of the most daunting, yet rewarding, part of this transformation, the call to courage. This is where we move past understanding and strategy and enter the realm of bold action. Courage, in the context of anxiety, is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to feel the fear fully and still commit to the forward movement. We must understand that anxiety thrives in the realm of avoidance and hesitation. Every time we avoid a difficult conversation, postpone a challenging task, or stay within the confines of our comfort zone to manage the fear, we inadvertently strengthen the grip of anxiety. We are teaching our system that the world is inherently unsafe, and that retreat is the only guaranteed path to temporary peace. The true act of courage, therefore, is the conscious choice to step into mild discomfort repeatedly. I realized I was perpetually waiting for a magical day when I would feel ready or calm enough to pursue my greater ambitions. That day never came. The truth is, we get ready by moving, not before moving. I am inviting you now to embrace personal responsibility for your trajectory, not in a punishing way, but as an act of profound self-empowerment. Responsibility is the acknowledgement that while we didn't choose the anxious feelings, we absolutely choose how we respond to them. This involves breaking down the big, terrifying goals into minuscule, manageable steps, what I call the next right step. When the entire journey feels overwhelming, which triggers the anxiety mechanism, we simply ask, what is the very next, small, imperfect action I can take right now? It might be sending one email, making one phone call, or spending 5 minutes on a daunting project. The victory is not in completing the task. The victory is in showing up for yourself, despite the internal resistance. This is the act of building faith in progress. Faith is not a blind belief in a positive outcome. It is the confidence derived from repeated, observable actions that prove to your anxious mind that you are resilient and capable. This phase requires radical acceptance of imperfection. The anxious mind loves control and predictability. Thus, it loathes vulnerability and mistakes. We must intentionally practice being imperfect. Send the email with the typo. Deliver the presentation knowing your voice might shake. Try the new hobby and be spectacularly bad at it. Each intentional moment of imperfection is a therapeutic blow against the tyrannical inner critic that demands flawless execution. When we intentionally allow ourselves to be human, we starve the anxiety of its primary fuel source, the pursuit of the unattainable. Trust in your potential is not a passive wish. It is an active choice reinforced by small acts of courage. We must trust that the tools we developed in the previous stage, the 3-second pause, the grounding anchor, will hold us steady when the inevitable waves of fear rise. This is the integration of knowledge and action. It is the commitment to showing up as the hero of your own story, recognizing that heroes are not fearless. They are simply people who, when their heart pounds and their breath catches, still manage to take that single, shaky step forward. This is your moment to claim that power, to stop seeking safety through stagnation, and to embrace the electrifying uncertainty of growth. We have traversed the dark internal landscape, understood the flawed architecture of the inner critic, developed practical tools for regulation, and answered the demanding call to courage. Now, we arrive at the final, most necessary declaration, the radical affirmation of your identity, your worth, and your healing. This is not just an ending. It is the beginning of the rest of your life, lived on your terms. The most fundamental shift we must solidify is the distinction between who we are and what we feel. Remember, anxiety is not your identity. It is a neurological experience, a temporary state, a habit of the mind, but it is not the totality of your being. You are the consciousness that observes the anxiety. You are the wisdom that chooses the response. You are the strength that endures the feeling. I want you to hear this with absolute clarity. Your worth is not earned through your productivity, your perfection, or your ability to remain constantly calm. Your worth is inherent. It is the baseline reality of your existence. The effort you have put into managing the silent anxiety, the sheer mental strength required to simply navigate a world that demands composure while your insides are screaming. That effort is proof of your profound resilience, not your weakness. Healing is often misrepresented as a finish line where fear ceases to exist. That is a myth. True healing is the radical capacity to live a full, meaningful life alongside the inevitable, occasional presence of fear. It is the ability to greet that familiar tension in your chest, acknowledge it with a nod, and say, "Hello, old feeling. I see you are here, but I have a life to live." And then, you turn back to the moment. This final empowerment comes through the daily ritual of claiming your true identity. I encourage you to adopt a powerful declaration, spoken internally or aloud, every morning. I am safe. I am capable. I am imperfect, and that is where my authenticity lies. The transformation you seek is not outside of you. It is a profound realization of what has always been true within you. You were always resilient. You were always powerful. The anxiety simply served as a thick curtain, obscuring your view of your own magnificence. The heavy exhaustion, the racing thoughts, the silent dread, these were merely signals that your soul was outgrowing the old, restrictive narrative, yearning for authenticity and expansion. I bless you with the courage to be messy, the grace to forgive yourself when you slip back into old patterns, and the profound self-trust to continue the journey, one imperfect, courageous step at a time. Do not allow your past struggles to define your future potential. Today, you rise. You rise with the knowledge that you are equipped, you are worthy, and you are ready to reclaim every single moment the silent anxiety tried to steal. Go forth, not searching for peace, but carrying peace with you, knowing that the deepest control you will ever find is the control you exercise over your own response. This is your power. Use it now. Building upon this foundation, we confront the single greatest barrier to transformation, the activation energy required to sustain movement against the immense internal friction. I vividly recall the afternoon I was scheduled to make a crucial phone call, one that would dissolve a long-standing, unproductive arrangement. Every fiber of my being wanted to delay, to reschedule, to simply vanish. My stomach churned, and a voice insisted, "Just wait until tomorrow when you feel stronger." This inertial drag, this mental weight that opposes necessary action, is not cowardice. It is the final, potent resistance of the old pattern fighting for survival. This is the precise ignition point where courage is forged. We must intentionally override the urge to retreat by focusing solely on the initiation of the task, not the completion. Moreover, true courageous movement must encompass relational risk. Up until now, much of our work has been internal, managing thoughts and regulating private physiology. But sustained transformation requires exposure, demanding we utilize our voice in spaces where silence once reigned supreme. Consider the application when you face a partner, colleague, or family member who consistently oversteps your boundaries. The courage here lies in the willingness to articulate a clear, non-negotiable boundary, even knowing it may trigger discomfort or even withdrawal from others. This is terrifying because it activates the deep, primal wiring around the potential for abandonment. Yet, asserting a personal boundary is perhaps the purest act of self-honor. I learned that my boundaries weren't fences built in anger. They were anchors established in integrity, defining where I ended and the other person began. Consequently, bold movement forward is intrinsically tied to identity integration. We have to stop performing the role of a capable, self-assured person and start being that individual. This requires what I call signing the inner contract. When I finally committed to a major career pivot, I didn't tell everyone immediately. I told one trusted mentor. That public, albeit limited, declaration solidified the commitment. It moved the aspiration from the ephemeral land of dreams into the concrete territory of accountability. The challenge here is the continuous effort to integrate the aspirational self, the person who sets boundaries, takes risks, and speaks authentically, with the current self who still feels wobbly. We bridge this gap not by erasing the current self, but by continually showing up in the world as the person we intend to become, choosing the challenging conversation over the easy avoidance, the difficult truth over the comforting lie. Crucially, sustaining momentum means developing an entirely new relationship with setbacks. The path of growth is never linear. It is a series of upward spirals punctuated by moments of regression, what I term the wobble test. When you experience a day where all your old worries return, where you revert to self-sabotage, that is not failure. It is simply your system testing the new foundation. A person of courage doesn't beat themselves up during the wobble. They pause, assess, and gather data. They ask, what external pressure or unmet need triggered this temporary reversion? This shift, from viewing regression as definitive defeat to treating it as critical systemic feedback, is what separates temporary change from enduring transformation. We must cultivate a fierce faith, not in perfection, but in the certainty of our capacity to always return to the path. Trust your inherent potential. It is not a finite resource. It is the steady, generative force that demands expression, provided you continue to give it the fuel of intentional, imperfect action. We have traveled far beyond the initial tremor that first brought us here. Do not mistake the residual shadows for defeat. Recognize them instead as the final remnants of an obsolete programming. What you once perceived as inherent weakness, that immense sensitivity, the intensity of your internal experience, is, in truth, the very wellspring of your profound depth and empathy. I stopped viewing the churning in my core as a sign of imminent collapse and realized I had simply been running a powerful mental engine without a proper map. This intensity, once channeled, transforms from debilitating dread to fierce, focused power. You possess a unique capacity for detail and foresight precisely because you have navigated the turbulent waters of internal emotional struggle. Honor this history. It is your badge of survival and your teacher. Moving forward, your greatest assignment becomes the maintenance of your internal climate. Think of your awareness not as a battlefield, but as a steady lighthouse beam cutting through the emotional fog. Whenever a persistent emotional disturbance arises, that familiar churning in your core, you now possess the intrinsic mechanisms to regulate your own atmosphere. This requires self-kindness, which is the necessary fuel for ongoing regulation. It is a radical refusal to participate in the self-flagellation that defined your past. If you stumble, if old habits of worry resurface for an afternoon, you simply observe that moment of lapse with gentle curiosity, not crushing judgment. True power lies in recognizing that a temporary regression is merely a minor correction in a long-term ascent, demanding patience rather than condemnation. Furthermore, authentic healing involves the profound self-trust that allows you to detach your worth from outcomes. For so long, we allowed our identity to be tethered to our performance. The perfect project, the flawless interaction, the controlled emotional state. Now, you must integrate the knowledge that your intrinsic value is unconditional. I remember the day I intentionally submitted work I knew was good enough, but not perfect. The world did not end. The relief that followed was the sound of a long-held chain snapping. You are not defined by the metric of your success, but by the integrity with which you engage with your life. You are a complete, worthy being, even when you feel clumsy, uncertain, or exposed. Consequently, this moment is your declaration of internal sovereignty. You are graduating from the school of constant worry. You have earned the right to occupy your space fully, unapologetically. When I finally released the need for external validation, that exhausting search for permission to simply be, I found an unshakable ground beneath my feet. This is the ultimate freedom I wish for you. The profound self-acceptance that allows you to walk through the world, not searching for affirmation, but radiating the quiet confidence of a person who has reclaimed their own authority. You carry within you a wisdom forged in struggle. Let that be your defining legacy. Do not dim your light to appease the discomfort of others. and never shrink back to accommodate an outdated idea of who you were supposed to be. You are whole, you are capable, and you possess every single resource required to meet whatever life delivers. Rise now, grounded in the certainty of your own magnificent capacity, and live the bold, authentic life that has waited patiently for you to claim it. The most potent challenges arise not from internal discord, but from the immense activation energy needed to translate inner resolve into external reality. I recall the pivotal moment I stood ready to send the email that would commit me to a massive, publicly visible pivot in my career. My stomach dropped, not due to the content, but due to confronting the palpable social friction inherent in placing myself on a new, scrutinized stage. We can master self-regulation within our private minds, yet still stall entirely when existence demands visibility and the risk of external judgment looms large. Courage, at this juncture, must evolve from being a mere emotional shield to functioning as an undeniable, forward-propelling force. It is the conscious decision to fire the launch code, accepting the inevitable turbulence that follows the takeoff. Building on this transformation, we must introduce the concept of calculated exposure. This is not reckless abandon. Rather, it is the intentional, strategic act of stepping outside the protected perimeter of self-management and entering a dynamic social space where outcomes are inherently unpredictable. Think about voicing an unpopular yet necessary conviction in a charged group setting, or initiating a tough, overdue financial negotiation. I remember sitting opposite a seasoned negotiator, spine rigid, knowing I had to advocate for my value without flinching. It felt less like a conversation and more like walking across a tightrope strung high above any safety net. But doing it proved something profound. My ability to handle resulting social tension was far greater than my internal projection of catastrophe had suggested. I found that the discomfort I anticipated was always worse than the discomfort I actually experienced. Consequently, sustaining this momentum requires a radical redefinition of failure. If previous phases allowed for internal imperfection, this phase demands we treat every attempt that doesn't yield the desired result not as a personal indictment, but as essential empirical evidence. I learned to treat every endeavor, a botched presentation, a misunderstood collaboration, a failed venture, as a unit in my personal laboratory. Our goal is to gather data, not to achieve flawless execution. When we shed the crushing expectation of perfection, we free up immense mental bandwidth previously dedicated to anticipating catastrophic outcomes. We must discard the notion of failure as a final verdict and embrace it as crucial navigational feedback, an invaluable tool for course correction. This perspective shift transforms paralyzing shame into actionable insight. Furthermore, we confront the challenge of persistence when the initial psychological novelty wears off. This is where commitment deepens, moving beyond the adrenaline rush of novelty into the deep, often monotonous effort required to keep moving. It is the heavy lift required after the exhilaration of the first step fades. Maintaining forward momentum is tested most severely, not during the crisis itself, but during the long, uncelebrated middle section of any significant endeavor. When motivation wanes, we must draw not on fleeting inspiration, but on deep, quiet resolve, trusting my established rhythm and discipline over ephemeral feelings. Our commitment is to the process of becoming, regardless of how we feel on any given Tuesday morning. Another crucial layer involves managing the perception of others while prioritizing internal integrity. As we step into greater visibility, we invite external commentary and critique. The anxious impulse is to retract, to manage every perceived slight, or to alter our trajectory based on external noise. The courageous action, conversely, is to cultivate an inner compass so steady it is unaffected by the winds of public opinion. We must learn the difference between constructive external feedback and mere noise meant to pull us back to a smaller, more comfortable scale. This transition is finalized when we decide that the only audience whose approval truly matters is our future self, looking back on a life lived authentically and boldly. This is the ultimate declaration of internal authority. There comes a juncture in every transformation where mere contemplation becomes inadequate. It is time for introspection to yield to velocity. A profound difference exists between understanding the roadmap and actually initiating the journey by setting foot upon a path you know will be uneven. We must now talk about the essential psychological leap, making an irrevocable commitment to your future self, an unspoken oath that transcends momentary discomfort. I am speaking about cultivating an inner integrity so solid that it dictates your actions, irrespective of the loud, emotional objections arising from your conditioned past. This means abandoning the pervasive hope that one day, the universe will simply bestow stillness upon you before you act. That peace is found in motion, not in waiting for a silent signal. Building on this, courage requires you to actively dismantle the good person trap, the ingrained need to accommodate everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own needs and aspirations. Many of us have spent decades believing that vulnerability is a sign of incompetence, meticulously crafting a facade of perpetual composure. True boldness, conversely, is the revolutionary act of dropping the mask. Consider the quiet terror of asking for a raise, or articulating a desire for greater intimacy in a relationship, knowing that the reply might be no. It is in these moments of unfiltered presence, where you stand fully exposed without the armor of expectation, that authentic power is generated. The reward for this terrifying honesty is not immediate success, but an unassailable self-respect that no external outcome can diminish. Consequently, this commitment requires consistent practice in self-advocacy, particularly in situations where silence feels safer than speaking truth to power. I recall a meeting years ago where I had to firmly state the value of my creative contribution to a project, a value I had consistently undermined through overly agreeable pricing. Every rational impulse screamed at me to back down, to minimize the confrontation and preserve harmony. Yet, I held the line. That single, firm articulation of my non-negotiable worth shattered a self-imposed glass ceiling that had kept my professional life suffocated for years. The physical reaction was intense. My hands were trembling, but the aftermath was liberation. It proves that the greatest barriers we face are rarely external obstacles. They are the ancient, internalized limits dictating what we believe we are permitted to ask for, or what we believe we deserve to receive. Beyond this stage, maintaining a bold trajectory necessitates a deliberate shift away from defining success by ease. We must embrace the understanding that growth is, by definition, an inherently disruptive process. It is akin to navigating a stretch of whitewater rapids, challenging, demanding full focus, and entirely unpredictable. If you seek absolute comfort, you will stay anchored to the shore of stagnation. A person committed to forward movement accepts that difficulty is not a deviation from the plan, it is the plan itself. When the psychological fatigue sets in, when the novelty of your new commitment dissipates, you do not draw upon fleeting motivation. You rely on the deep, muscular reserve of discipline. This unwavering resolve, this quiet refusal to retreat simply because the journey feels hard, is the highest expression of faith in your own potential. That enduring trust, forged in repeated acts of courage, is the unbreakable contract you sign with your own destiny. We have now arrived at the quiet culmination of this intensive inner work, reaching a level of integration where mental noise settles into profound spaciousness. Look back not with judgment, but with observational stillness, at how different inner atmosphere feels now compared to the constant clamor that once dominated every waking hour. Where once there was a tight, constricted coil of worry dictating every reaction, now exists a vast, open expanse, a canvas on which we can consciously paint our intentions. This new state of being is not merely the absence of dread. It is the presence of an unwavering, low-frequency hum of quiet confidence. It is a fundamental trust in one's capacity to tolerate ambiguity, realizing that we no longer need the false security of predicting every worst-case scenario. Instead, we rest in a powerful, liberated present, recognizing that we are fully equipped to meet uncertainty with grace and intelligence. This liberation transcends mere coping mechanisms. It is a permanent adjustment of the spirit's operating frequency, allowing us to perceive the subtleties of joy and opportunity that the loud static of perpetual worry had completely drowned out. Building on this settling of the spirit, Consider how our deep struggle has bequeathed us an extraordinary gift: unparalleled emotional literacy. This intimate knowledge of darkness grants a singular ability to perceive the subtle emotional currents not only within ourselves, but also in the world around us. My years spent deciphering the minute tremors of my nervous system have not been wasted. They have refined my intuition into a sophisticated instrument. I now recognize the initial flutter of fear in others as a cry for understanding, rather than viewing it as a mirror of my own unresolved issues. Consequently, this depth of understanding becomes a unique power, a steady, guiding light that permits us to navigate complex relationships and high-stakes decisions with an authenticity previously unimaginable. We have earned the right to wield this wisdom, ensuring that our highly sensitive nature acts as an asset, generating deep connections and powerful insights, rather than remaining a source of private pain. Furthermore, we must enact the ultimate shift in agency, moving irreversibly from the role of a survivor constantly reacting to old emotional programming, to the role of the creator intentionally sculpting a vibrant future. Our past attempts at control were often desperate scrambles to prevent perceived harm. Now, armed with regulation skills and profound self-knowledge, we claim a higher form of control, the intentional management of our focus. I realized I was no longer defined by how well I endured hardship, but by how deliberately I chose to pursue expansive joy. This is where purpose finds its true voice. We become the conductor of our life's unfolding symphony, selecting the instruments, setting the tempo, and choosing the key, a shift demanding not just resilience, but artistic intention. Our decisions are no longer apologies for existence. They are declarations of intentionality, aligning our daily actions with the deepest, most authentic vision we hold for our flourishing. In closing, I offer a final blessing rooted in the certainty of what you have achieved. Go forth unburdened by the ghosts of what might have been, and fully embrace the vibrant reality of what is possible. May the silence you've uncovered within become a constant source of counsel, and may the wisdom gained from traversing the shadows act as an unbreakable shield. Carry with you this profound assurance: that unbreakable core within you, honed sharp by struggle, is ready for its purpose. You are not just ready to meet the challenges of life. You are ready to expand into the vast, luminous potential that awaits. Step into that expansive energy now, confidence flowing, spirit released, and claim the totality of your becoming. Reflecting on this arduous journey so far, we recognize a profound restructuring has occurred beneath the surface of everyday awareness. We started by meticulously examining the heavy chains we carried, the invisible tethers binding immense potential to outdated emotional scripts. It wasn't just about shedding that heavy, inherited baggage. It was about understanding the metallurgical composition of those restraints, knowing precisely how to file down each stubborn rivet of limiting thought. I observed within myself, and perhaps you recognize it in your most recent responses, a fundamental shift from a reflexive life to a deliberate, conscious existence. We have ceased to be the passive recipients of overwhelming emotional currents, the driftwood tossed by an endless psychological tide. Instead, we have learned the ancient, vital art of setting sail, not by waiting for perfectly calm seas, but by mastering the tiller and the rigging in the very heart of the squall. I recall the quiet certainty that emerged the first time a sudden, towering wave of overwhelming feeling crested, and instead of being consumed by its cold rush, I automatically deployed a newly ingrained strategy. It was a moment of true self-witnessing, observing the old mechanism of defense begin its familiar, desperate grind, only to have a conscious, higher intention gently interrupt its trajectory. The profound internal strategies we adopted were never intended merely as momentary fixes. They were the complex calibration of an entire, personalized navigational system. Now, that system begins to function almost autonomously. Where hesitation once created debilitating mental friction, there is now a fluid, almost inevitable momentum. This is the direct consequence of repeatedly choosing forward movement over static discomfort, turning those difficult, micro-decisions into a unified kinetic force that propels us across vast internal distances. Our life's narrative is no longer defined by how well we conceal our perceived weaknesses, but how robustly we choose to leverage our newly recognized, unique inner strengths. The implication of achieving this level of self-mastery is nothing less than the silent, radical reclamation of our central authority. We spent so much energy seeking external validation, a misplaced, desperate effort to quiet internal uncertainty with temporary, external applause. But now, having forged an undeniable trust with ourselves through consistent, rigorous, honest practice, external approval diminishes to nothing more than background noise. Our inherent worth is no longer a variable dependent on performance or the fickle measure of public perception. It is an established, non-negotiable fact of being. I finally understood that liberation isn't found in the complete elimination of struggle, but in the unconditional acceptance of our own magnificent, messy, unfolding process. We are no longer governed by the reflexive alarms of an overly cautious primal brain. We are guided by a deeper, more resonant wisdom, a clear, steady voice that speaks not in panic, but in grounded assurance. This intricate convergence of psychological understanding, physical regulation, and audacious action creates an unshakable inner citadel, ready to face existence not with guarded trepidation, but with open-hearted, secure presence. We have reached the vantage point where we can finally see the grand vista of possibility laid out before us. I look back at the place where this entire conversation began, that quiet, unassuming kitchen, sunlight highlighting the dust, the heart quietly accelerating without a discernible cause. I recognize that person, trapped in a silent emotional siege, yet I no longer identify with that entrapment. We embarked on a profound and sometimes grueling excavation, digging beneath the surface noise of racing thoughts to uncover the bedrock of inherent capability. What we found was not a fragile spirit needing protection, but a highly sensitive, fiercely intelligent system that simply needed a new set of instructions. The deepest, most enduring insight I gained through this process is that our struggle was never proof of weakness. It was proof of an enormous, unmanaged potential. The immense energy dedicated to anticipating catastrophe, to mentally rehearsing disaster scenarios, that was, in its essence, a misplaced reservoir of foresight and creative planning. Our task was not to drain the reservoir, but to build new channels, redirecting that potent flow toward intentional creation and genuine engagement. I no longer view the lingering echoes of past apprehension as personal failure. Instead, I regard them with the detached respect one offers an elderly relative. They may be present, but they no longer set the rules for the household. This is where the transformation crystallizes into permanent identity. The change isn't in what we do occasionally, but in who we are consistently. We have moved past seeking temporary relief from internal distress and entered a sustained relationship with authentic self-trust. We now possess a muscular wisdom, an internal compass calibrated not by fleeting emotions, but by repeated, courageous microactions. That feeling of apprehension, whenever it arises, is no longer a stop sign. It is a signal demanding deep, mindful attention, inviting us to ground ourselves in the present moment and choose our response deliberately. We have learned to hold space for the complexity of human experience, the joy and the shadow, without allowing either extreme to dictate our trajectory. We are the masters of our response, which is the only true sovereignty available to us. The final, revolutionary act is the unconditional acceptance of our ongoing human imperfection. I learned that trying to live a life without vulnerability is not strength. It is a life lived in a perpetually locked room. True confidence is the willingness to walk through the world knowing you might stumble, knowing you might fail, knowing you might be criticized, and choosing to proceed anyway, because your worth is not staked on the outcome. It is fixed. It is inherent. My journey has become less about conquering a specific internal battle and more about celebrating the boundless capacity for continuous becoming. I have found my peace not in stillness, but in motion guided by intention. As you step away from this shared space, carrying these insights and tools, I urge you to recognize the hero you have become. You navigated the storm within and emerged with skill, not just survival scars. Do not wait for external validation or a perfect emotional forecast to begin living fully. Start now, from where you stand, armed with your quiet resolve and your profound, hard-won self-knowledge. Let your next breath be a declaration of power, and your next step be a testament to your unassailable capacity for growth. Go forth and live with the certainty that you are capable, you are worthy, and you are ready.